Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our last lecture in the perinatology research branch lecture series on the developmental evolution of reproduction. Today we will talk about a classical topic in the intersection between reproductive medicine and evolutionary thinking, namely the idea of the obstetric dilemma. Now, this idea got into trouble recently when our friend Dan Lieberman actually tested experimentally the assumptions of this model that was proposed by Sherwood Washburn in the 1960s. So now we are in a position where we need to rethink the whole idea, and I'm happy that we will have one of the leaders in that area, Professor Pavlicev from the University of Vienna, giving us a lecture on exactly that topic. Please go ahead.
Oops, I think, yes, okay. Yes, so good evening, everyone. Thank you, Gunther, for inviting me. Thank you, Roberto, for organizing and for leading this. So I will talk about the obstetric dilemma today, but I would like to start in anchoring the problem in the medical problem here. So obstructed labor as a global burden, and not all of the obstructed labor is due to cephalopelvic disproportion. So disproportion between the cranium and or also the shoulder and the pelvic size. But that's the problem that I want to anchor my talk in. Of course, one might start in a very fundamental way. Why would evolutionary biologists even think about medical problems? And the most fundamental view on that, of course, is that we just wonder, given that there is natural selection, why do diseases exist? So put this into now the obstetric problem of cephalopelvic disproportion. Why does it exist if selection acts? Just as a framing question. This is a figure from also 1960s, where in a very schematic way the disproportions or the proportions between the fetus and the birth canal sizes have been compared across species. And what you see here on the lower right is the human situation. So it's been observed long ago that there is a very, very, very close fit. So the question, of course, that is posed here is, why did female pelvis not evolve to be broader and therefore also safer for birth? Sherwood Washburn formulated obstetrical dilemma for the first time in this quote here in this paper, and it's actually really interesting how in this paper really this one sentence or two sentences got so much attention. He said, in men, adaptation to bipedal locomotion decreased the size of the bony birth canal at the same time that the exigencies of tool use selected for larger brains. This obstetrical dilemma was solved by delivery of the fetus at a much earlier stage of development. And so let's look a little bit about into this claim. Before I go on, I would just like to introduce a concept that is very much used in evolutionary biology, and that's evolutionary trade-off. And we know, these are two examples. First, we know several of these concepts just make sense. We have a trade-off, for example, between the size and the number of offspring, either few large offspring or numerous and small offspring. We have a trade-off between endurance and strength, for example, in muscles. So when we have selection on two different aspects, then none of these aspects can be optimized completely, right? So in that context, Washburn's suggestion is such evolutionary trade-off, namely that pelvic shape is a compromise between two conflicting functions of pelvis, so upright gait and large-headed neonates. So when we look at the trade-offs like this, we notice that in this context, of course, not being able to change could actually be a signature of such a trade-off between selection pressures. And in this case, it would be selection due to large feet, selection for broader pelvis, and due to gait, due to bipedal gait, to narrower pelvis. So Washburn did really two things. He said that the tight fit of the birth canal is such a trade-off, but he also talks about the relatively premature birth. And let's get that one first out of the way. What is meant by that is that that human neonates are born earlier in their development than the neonates of our closest relatives, of apes, and he calls that premature, and we call that very often also secondarily attritial. So in the range between the very, very, very early in development born neonates and very late attritial to precocial, human is kind of back more to the attritial neonates than the rest of humans relatives. But if we look a little bit closer, then we see that this doesn't actually mean that it's evolutionarily preterm, so that we have a tendency to be born preterm, already built in our evolution. Because if you look closely, then our closest relatives are actually have almost the same gestational length, or even in chimpanzee, even a little bit shorter. So it doesn't seem to be that we are actually born earlier in the same trajectory. What seems to have happened is that we develop slower. So we are born at the same time, but are less developed at that time. All right. Yeah.
Could I ask you, Mihaela, if you can go 2 slides before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one?
Yes, perfect. Mm-hmm. So just as a brief commentary, the idea that humans are premature, I, as an obstetrician, find it objectionable, because we would generally, believe that has consequences, and I agree with your interpretation. But the reason I ask you to show these slides is that what are is that months that you have here?
It's months.
And is it possible? Is there data that is precise about weeks of gestation in terms of menstrual age for all these species?
I'm not sure I understand, Roberto.
So we speak in human gestation,
right?
We speak about 40 weeks, and
right.
I'm just wondering what in the orangutan and the chimpanzee, what are the equivalent numbers in terms of menstrual age?
In weeks,
yeah.
Or or you mean in the non-pregnant cycle?
Oh no, in how many weeks in menstrual age is the duration of pregnancy? Is that
I'm sure that can be found. I wouldn't know it now out of my head. But
these are menstrual age or conceptional?
No. So this is gestational age, gestational length.
At birth.
Months. Yes.
Okay. I think the question is whether it's measured relative to the last menstruation, or whether it's measured.
Okay. That I do not know how it's actually measured. Yeah, yeah.
And
That I
then
really do not know.
And the next slide, Mihaela.
Yes.
So the point you are making here between the, which one is the red?
So if now red is our relatives, closest relatives, so apes would be red, and green would be the human.
Yeah, and the term altricial, what is the etymology, if I may ask, what is the etymology of altricial?
So altricial would be really helpless in the sense that they would be in animal among animal species. It would be naked, blind, completely dependent on feeding from the parent.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So let's now go into the tight fit of the birth canal and look at that. So one thing that I'm sure Washburn didn't mean that time, but it's good to keep in mind is that at the same time evolving the upright gait, bipedal gait, and large brain is not really at the same time. So bipedalism evolved much earlier than did the large brain. So we have here the timing, and we have the human lineage, and so we have bipedalism way earlier, where the cranial size was still much smaller, and then the cranium evolving into already into the pelvis that has been already evolving for bipedalism. So that's important. And one other thing that you see here, and I will come back to that, is that the oval shape of the pelvis also changed from laterally oval to the anterior posteriorly oval, and I'll come back to that. All right. So one thing that Günther already referred to was that the recent evidence actually suggests that broader female pelvis may not actually impose locomotor cost as the gait, the proposal of gait being a constraint has suggested. So we see here locomotor cost for walking and running between males and females, and we know that females have a broader pelvis, and it doesn't seem to be higher really for either running or walking. There is one thing to say about this study, and that is that it has been done on very sportive part of the population. So let's keep that in mind. But anyway, we have this trade-off that doesn't seem to be trading off really so much with the bipedal gait. So we have a selection due to large feet for broader pelvis and something for narrower pelvis, probably. So let's look what that might actually be. It seems that if we look closer, what is also a constraint is that we see a lot of pelvic floor disorders, and they seem to be more common with the spacious birth canal. And following on this thread, then, if not gait, what functional trade-off might be keeping the pelvis from broadening? I will go through 3 explanations that all have some evidence, all need more work. So one thing that also, of course, changed with upright gait is that the inner organs and the fetus became aligned with the pelvic canal. So we have here the situation of still quadrupedal primate, and you see that of course the pressure was on the abdominal wall, whereas the pressure changes, of course, with upright walking, and this changes again encephalization, so with really strong increase in fetal size. So there is quite some evidence just looking at the anatomy that pelvic floor actually plays a really strong role in this change. So attachment size, both in terms of sacral bone here, as well as in terms of ischial spines, changes. So they become larger. We have here also the male and female comparison. And just to show you what I mean with attachment size for ligaments and muscles, here the sacrum and the ischial spines and the ligaments attached. So so that seems to be increasing with increasing cranium. So it seems to play a really strong role. Another thing that seems to be supporting the importance of really stable pelvis is the human pubic symphysis. We often talk about human symphysis as a place that actually broadens the pelvis at the time of parturition or late pregnancy as well. But when we compare how much the pubic symphysis actually changes in human with changes in other species, it suddenly appears that actually human has a very, very sturdy symphysis. So we have here some examples of changes in guinea pig, up to 23 millimeters during late pregnancy and parturition. In mice, 4 to 10 millimeters, so more than in human actually, that has about 3. Pocket gopher has even more extreme situation with pubulolysis. If we look at the pelvises of other species, we see that there's actually a huge variation of how the pubic symphysis looks like, sometimes completely fused, sometimes completely open, actually. All right, and then there's quite some support for the pelvic floor hypothesis when we look through the eyes of the modeler of the pelvis. I showed you this part on the left already previously, that there is a change in the rotation of this of the oval structure of the pelvis as the cranium increases, and with most recent increase. And we also know that human has a rotational birth. So we have here the 3 parts of the pelvis, 3 levels of the pelvis: the inlet, the midplane, and the outlet. And so a recent study by Katja Stensfield and colleagues in Vienna used modeling to understand what is the pressure really on the pelvic floor, and also a little bit to explain what kind of shape would be the ideal shape, what is the displacement, what is the strain, and what is the stress of the pelvic floor. And I'm showing you here only a small part of the results here for different shapes of the outlet. And what I want you to take from here is really just that we have at the laterally oval outlet a relatively high displacement and strain and stress of the pelvic floor. This even increases with the round shape, and it actually decreases quite strongly with the anterior-posterior shape of the orientation of the outlet. So it seems that anterior-posteriorly oval outlet shape leads to a lesser strain and stress on pelvic floor than the mediolateral oval shape. And you might ask yourself, okay, but if that's so, why not the whole way through? Why only the outlet? And it seems that the stability of gait is actually quite well modeled, and it seems that anterior-posteriorly oval orientation of inlet would actually require much greater pelvic tilt, so much greater lordosis, which is not really compatible with gait, leading to then rotational birth. So the transition from lateral oval to the anterior-posterior oval. All right. So we are, as you have probably noticed, we are back to gait actually playing a role together with the pelvic floor strength. So if the support function of pelvis is crucial, is this really reflected also in pathology? So if broader pelvis actually means greater strain, so laterally broader pelvis, do we see this? Are women with broader pelvis more prone to pelvic floor disorders? And there seems to be quite good evidence for that. Not all is pointing into the same direction, so there's a lot to do still. But there's quite a lot of evidence showing that actually wide lateral pelvic floor does lead to more of the pelvic floor disorders. So incontinence, the prolapse, and also mixed disorders. So what this might point to is that there is a trade-off between supporting the fetus and the childbirth. So we have advantages of narrow pelvis for good support, but advantages of wide pelvis for childbirth. So one of the trade-offs that we might be encountering. I want to put forward another one that I think has been quite another perspective that has been quite neglected, and that is that there might also be a trade-off due to the importance of pelvic floor strength for male pelvic function. We've been quite focused on the female pelvis, but forgetting that the same structure is present in male as well. And one thing that is not obvious to me is how can female pelvis evolve without actually affecting male pelvis? So what keeps male pelvis from responding to obstetric selection? We know that they are of different dimensions. So and we also know that that's not only a consequence of allometry, for example, of the size. So the parts of the body that are regulated to some extent, at least by shared genes, usually respond to selection together. So at least in a correlated sense. So that's what we would expect, unless there is actually selection working in a different direction. And the reason why I'm showing you these two pictures is that these are some of the really well-known and understood correlated selection responses. On the left, the tomatoes, you might have noticed that at some point, tomatoes have lost their taste. And it turns out they lost their taste because the selection was against this remainder of this greenish stem part. And that was a correlated response of removing it. Very similar, the Dalmatian dogs, by selecting so strongly on this brilliantly white coat, also they're very often blind or deaf. So a consequence of correlated selection due to the pigment that is used in both cases. All right. So it's not obvious that male pelvic function is not also under selection, is not responding to the correlated selection in the females. So my thought is it must actually have a selection on the narrower pelvis itself. And one possible reason for that might be that the pelvic floor is under selection because of the erectile function, for the same reason that the stronger pelvic floor will be associated with the smaller, with narrower pelvis. We know that there are consequences of weak pelvic floor for erectile function. So that's a suggestion. Human is actually quite specific about the pelvic floor and about the erectile function, and that is that among primates, human has both a relatively large penis and long intromission. Intromission and the size of the body size, but also the size of the penis, are actually correlated across primates with baculum length. So we see that usually the larger the body weight and the longer the intromission, the longer the baculum is, so the support needed. Human has lost the penile bone, as you might know in evolution, but does have both large penis and long intromission. So it is quite likely that human pelvic floor actually have also in male a much more important function than in other species. Very little has been done on this particular hypothesis. It's also not so easy to do, of course, and when there is not as much data available. But I think we should not forget that the female pelvis cannot evolve in a completely detached from the male pelvic functions. All right. And finally, I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about the inherent, the constraint that is inherent actually to the selection itself. And that is the cliff edge model of obstetric selection. That's the model that was really developed by Philipp Mitteröcker here in Vienna. And it's actually quite straightforward. So if we consider an axis of variation that we call now here disproportion, the dimension where we have on the negative side the cases where the cranium is smaller than the pelvic canal, we have at 0 ideal fit. So and on the right we have a disproportion. So the positive values would lead to the disproportion. We can impose on this dimension the individual fitness, just simply meaning either survival or reproduction. And we have maybe yeah, maybe somebody can Can
you please mute your mic, please?
Perhaps somebody can mute. Yeah. Okay.
I think the host can mute the guests. Just continue, please.
Yeah. Okay. So if we impose on this distribution of
Good point.
phenotypic,
It's working, you think? Let's try. Okay.
all right. So if we impose the individual fitness on top of this distribution, what we see is
Mihaela, do you know who is the Gunther? Who is the host? Is that our aim?
I think the admin is the host.
Okay. EJ, can you go and check who is hosting this and mute because we can hear noises? It may be Pat. Can you check? Mihaela, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Right.
that's okay. That's, that happens. All right. So if we now next to the fitness curve also impose the distribution of the trait, we know the distribution of the trait that we are looking at as any other trait is symmetrical, whereas the fitness curve is not. Fitness curve increases with relatively larger fetus, but has this under normal circumstances, under not assisted circumstances, would have a very strong cliff at where the fetus still fits through the birth canal, and so if we try to optimize the situation, having most of the most possible neonates born at the best possible fitness, then we notice that the ideal fit here would always also mean that some of the individuals would fall off this cliff, so would actually not be able to be born. So that's the idea, and that's inherent to the asymmetrical selection in this case, or asymmetrical individual fitness. So, and that even if selection works, and even if the process is optimized, we would always get this kind of situation. And what is important for this kind of modeling is to show that actually the fit is to some extent heritable, and we can actually see that through the studies that there is actually a heritability of cephalopelvic disproportion. So the daughters whose mothers needed C-section are also more likely to need C-sections themselves when they give birth. All right. What is potentially important when looking at this model is that you can also think about what happens when the cliff actually disappears, and that would be under circumstances of C-sections, for example, where there is not this kind of selection present anymore, and the question, of course, is whether our distribution would actually, under this kind of selection, wander further into this direction. In other words, whether we would get more cases of cephalopelvic disproportion. It's very hard to estimate that, because, of course, the sizes and have changed in the meantime, and of course also because we have a lot of C-sections done for all kinds of reasons. So it's hard to really claim what is going on. Of course, at some point there would be probably the birth size would be hitting also other limits, such as metabolic rate and so on. All right. So I don't think that there's been a lot of suggestions lately that maybe there is no dilemma. I think that showing that not everything that Washburn said is still holding doesn't mean that there is no dilemma, but that we just need to look at all the factors that actually play into the obstetrics, human obstetrics, and see what the consequences of those are and what kind of selections are actually acting. It seems that there is quite a good evidence that there is a selection both for broader pelvis as well as for narrower pelvis. So knowing what kind of selection that is and which factors play really an important role, I think is important. And I think that this is still a dilemma. So just a few take homes. So I think evolutionary trade-off is a valid model for human birth. And I think that the recent research has put forward quite a lot of insights. On the one hand, trade-off between pelvic support and easy birth, possibly also with male pelvic floor function, and of course the cleavage dynamics that might also suggest that cephalopelvic disproportion may increase in future. And with that, I would just say thank you for your attention and take any questions.